The afternoon sun beat down on the sleepy downtown streets, turning the pavement into a shimmering grill. Captain Alana Vance felt its heat through the thin fabric of her army t-shirt. She was just a person off duty today, not a soldier. She had left her uniform at home, opting for simple khaki pants and a plain green shirt, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. After 3 long tours overseas, where every shadow held potential danger, this quiet street in her own town felt like a dream. The most complicated decision she planned to make today was whether to get an iced coffee or a cold brew. She pushed open the door to Bean there, a little coffee shop with bell that jingled cheerfully. The air inside was cool and smelled of roasted beans and baked sugar. It was a normal scene. A student typed furiously on a laptop in the corner. An older couple shared a slice of pie. Elena let her shoulders relax. This was the peace she had fought for. She waited in line, her mind pleasantly blank, soaking in the utterly boring, beautiful normalcy of it all. She gave her order a large cold brew, black to the barista, a young woman with a smile. As she turned to find a seat, her eyes, trained by years of military intelligence work to notice details without even trying, scanned the room. It was a habit, a ghost from the war zones. She saw the student's tired eyes, the way the old man held his wife's hand, the deliverman rushing in to grab to-go cup. And then she saw the man by the door. He was jittery. His eyes weren't on the menu board or his phone. They were darting, sweeping over the patrons, lingering on bags and purses slung over chairbacks. He wore a dark hoodie despite the heat, hands shoved deep in the pockets. Elena's internal alarm, a silent bell that had kept her alive in Kandahar and Mosul, gave a soft, single ping. She dismissed it. "You're home," she told herself. Asterisk, not every nervous guy is a threat. He's probably just late for something. Asterisk. She was fishing a few dollars from her wallet when the world exploded into noise and motion. A woman in her 60s, with a kind face and a large, floral-patterned handbag, was leaving. The bag was on her shoulder. As she reached for the door handle, the jittery man moved. It wasn't a walk. It was a lunge. He grabbed the strap of the bag and yanked it with brutal force. The fabric tore with a sickening rip. The woman cried out, a sound of pure shock and fear, as she was spun and thrown off balance, crashing into a small table. Cups shattered. The man bolted out the door, the floral bag clutched in his fist like a trophy. Time didn't slow down for Elena. It simply became very, very clear. Every other person in the coffee shop froze, mouths open in stunned silence. Elena's body was moving before her mind had fully formed the thought go. Years of training had rewired her nerves. See a threat, neutralize the threat. Protect the vulnerable. It was a code woven into her muscle memory. Call 911. She shouted to the barista, her voice not a scream, but a sharp, commanding projectile. It cut through the frozen air. Then she was a blur of motion. She exploded out the coffee shop door, the little bell jangling madly behind her. The thief was already halfway down the block, running with a panicked, weaving gait. Elena settled into her pursuit. This was different from running for fitness. This was a tactical sprint. Her breathing regulated instantly. Her eyes locked onto his back, noting his pattern, predicting his path. She was taller, stronger, and fueled by a cold, focused fury. "Stop! Police!" She yelled, not because she was police, but because it was a universal command that might make him hesitate. It didn't. He glanced back, his eyes wide with panic, and put on a burst of speed, ducking into an alley between a laundromat and a hardware store. Elena didn't break stride. Civilians on the sidewalk gasped and jumped out of her way. She was a force of nature in khaki, her face a mask of pure determination. She reached the alley mouth and scanned it. It was cluttered with dumpsters and cardboard boxes. She saw a flash of the dark hoodie disappearing around a far corner into the back parking lot of the strip mall. She followed, her boots slapping on the greasy asphalt. The air here smelled of garbage and wet concrete. As she rounded the corner, she saw him. He was fumbling with a chain-link fence, trying to climb it, the purse still dangling from his hand. He was trapped. "It's over!" Elena called out, slowing to a walk. She held her hands up, palms out, to show she wasn't armed. "Just drop the bag and sit down. The police are coming." The man whirled around. He was younger than she'd thought, his face slick with sweat and twisted with desperation. And in his hand, suddenly, was a knife. It was a cheap, foldable thing, but the blade that flicked out looked very real. "Get back!" he shrieked, waving it wildly. "I'll cut you. I swear." Elena's entire world narrowed to the blade. Her training took over completely. Fear was a luxury. She assessed. Single attacker, unstable, short-range weapon. Her mind calculated distances, angles, reactions. She kept her voice low and steady, a calm center in the storm of his panic. "You don't want to do that," she said, taking a slow step forward. "A theft is one thing. This is a whole different world of trouble. Put the knife down." He lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate stab aimed at her stomach. Elena didn't flinch. She had seen far worse. She sidestepped the thrust with the ease of someone dodging a slow pitch, her left hand snapping out to grab his wrist. She used his own momentum against him, twisting his arm up and back in one fluid motion. He yelled in pain. The knife clattered to the ground. With a quick, precise sweep of her leg, she knocked his feet out from under him. He landed hard on his stomach, the air whooshing out of him. Elena followed him down, driving a knee into his back to pin him, gripping his now empty wrist and pressing it firmly against the small of his back. "Stay down," she said, the words crisp and final. She reached for the torn purse, sliding it away from his grasping free hand. The fight was out of him. He lay there, wheezing, crying softly into the asphalt. Elena took her first deep breath since the coffee shop. Her heart was pounding, a steady, powerful drum in her chest. Adrenaline still buzzed in her veins, but the job was done. The threat was contained. The victim's property was recovered. She could hear distant sirens now, growing louder. Good. She maintained her hold, her eyes scanning the area. This backlot was empty except for a few parked cars. A door to the convenience store's back room was shut. It was just the two of them in the dingy alley. What she couldn't know, was what was happening just on the other side of that building. In the front parking lot, 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt, responding to the 911 call. But the information that had come over their radio was a garbled, terrifying mess. The barista's frantic call had been clear, but a second caller, someone who'd seen only a flash of the chase from a moving car, had given a different story. That caller, breathless and scared, had told the dispatcher, "A woman, a big woman in army clothes. She's beating up some guy in the back alley. She's crazy. She attacked him." The 2 officers, Jenkins and Murray, heard this update as they jumped out of their cars. Their training prepared them for violence. Their hearts raced. They drew their service weapons and moved quickly toward the alley's entrance from the street side, their focus laser-sharp on the report of a violent assault in progress. They had no picture of the purse snatching, no image of the heroic chase. In their minds, based on the fractured information, they were about to interrupt a brutal crime. They rounded the corner of the building, weapons up, ready to face a dangerous, out-of-control assailant. And in that moment, in the dirty back lot, Elena Vance, a captain in the United States Army, a woman who had just protected a civilian and disarmed a criminal, heard the shout behind her. "Police! Get your hands in the air! Get off him now!" The voice was raw with tension. Elena froze for a split second, confused. Then, her training as an officer kicked in. Compliance with law enforcement was paramount. She began to turn her head, to explain, to identify herself. Her mouth opened. She started to say, "I'm a U.S. Army offie." Beneath her, the criminal, hearing the police, made a sudden, stupid move. He bucked, trying to twist free. Elena's knees shifted to maintain control. Her body moved slightly. From the perspective of the two officers at the alley mouth, backlit by the sun, it looked like the powerful woman on top of the man was ignoring their command, was possibly reaching for something, was definitely not letting go. A single, thunderous crack split the afternoon. A searing heat, like a red-hot poker, tore through Elena's side. The breath was ripped from her lungs, not by impact, but by sheer, incomprehensible shock. The world tilted, then blurred into a swirl of gray sky and gritty asphalt. The weight of the man beneath her was gone. The only sound was a ringing in her ears, deep and absolute, and the distant, fading echo of her own unfinished sentence. Then, nothing but the warm, dark spread of pain and the shocking, metallic smell of her own blood mixing with the scent of garbage on the ground. The world didn't go black for Elena. It shattered into a million sharp, bright pieces of wrong. The sound came first, a pop that was too small, too dry for the chaos it caused. Then the feeling, a fist of pure, hot pressure punching into her right side just above her hip. It wasn't like the movies. There was no slow-motion fall. One moment she was in control, her mind clear, her body a tool doing its job. The next, her legs were simply gone. They folded beneath her as if the bones had vanished. She dropped sideways, her shoulder hitting the gritty asphalt with a sickening thud. A whoosh of air left her lungs, but no scream came. Her brain was a scrambled radio, trying to tune into a station that wasn't there. She lay on her back, staring up at a strip of pale blue sky between the buildings. The sky was so normal. It made no sense. Beneath the ringing in her ears, other sounds leaked in. A man was sobbing. It was the thief, scrambling away from her on his hands and knees, his face a slick mask of snot and terror. "I didn't do it. She was on me. I didn't do it." He babbled. Then, the shouting. Two voices, tight and strained, yelling over each other. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands. Don't you move. Stay down." Elena tried to turn her head toward the voices. A wave of nausea, thick and oily, rolled through her. Her side was on fire. It was a deep, angry burn that pulsed with every heartbeat. She felt a strange warmth spreading across her stomach, soaking into her shirt. She knew what it was. She'd seen it before, on sand far away from here. But this warmth was hers. Her training, drilled into her deeper than fear, fought its way to the surface. Asterisk assess the wound. Apply pressure. Asterisk. Her left hand flopped weakly toward her side. It felt wet. Her fingers came away dark and slick. "My hands," she tried to say, but her voice was a ragged whisper, lost in the noise. She forced her arms to move, to lift them slowly, palms open toward the sky in the universal sign of surrender. The simple act sent a lightning bolt of agony through her torso. A small, choked gasp escaped her lips. Two figures moved into her blurry field of vision. Police officers. They were standing over her, their guns still pointed. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. They looked young, she thought dimly. So young. The one in front, the one whose finger had been on the trigger, was breathing in short, sharp pants like he'd just run a mile. The other officer, slightly behind him, was staring at the scene. His eyes jumped from Elena on the ground, to the sobbing thief crouched against a dumpster, to the floral-patterned purse lying discarded between them like a piece of evidence. His gun began to waver, then lowered just a fraction. "Daryl," he said to the first officer, his voice tight. "The bag. Look at the bag." The first officer, Daryl, didn't seem to hear. His whole world was the woman on the ground. The woman he'd shot. "Roll over," he commanded, his voice cracking. "Roll onto your stomach, now." Elena tried to speak again. This was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. She just needed to tell them. "I'm a soldier," she managed, the words sticky in her dry mouth. "U.S. Army." "I said roll over." The officer screamed, the fear in his voice twisting into something close to rage. He took a step closer. From the mouth of the alley, a new voice cut through, shrill and horrified. "Oh my God! What did you do?" It was the woman from the coffee shop, the victim. She had followed the commotion, her face ashen. She pushed past the parked cars, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's her. That's the woman who saved me. She chased him. He stole my purse. She helped me." Her words hit the air like stones dropped into still water. The second officer, Ben, flinched as if struck. He holstered his weapon completely, his hands coming up. "Daryl, lower your weapon." "Lower it." But Officer Daryl Jenkins was trapped in a tunnel. The woman on the ground was the threat. The report had said a violent assault. He saw the knife on the asphalt a few feet away. He saw her military-style clothes, her powerful build. His brain, flooded with adrenaline, and a bias he would never admit to, had written a story the second he'd rounded the corner. A dangerous person of color attacking a helpless white man. The facts were now screaming at him that the story was wrong, but it was too loud, too late. The gun in his hand felt like it was welded there. "She has to comply," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. She was on top of him. Elena's vision was starting to spot with little black dots. The warmth on her side was becoming a cool, alarming wetness. The pain was a constant roaring thing. She knew what shock felt like. She was slipping into it. "Stay awake," she commanded herself. "Stay awake." Officer Ben Murray moved. He ignored his partner, stepping carefully toward the thief, who was still curled into a ball. "You," Ben said, his voice forcibly calm. "What happened here?" The thief couldn't form a coherent sentence. "She jumped me. I had the knife, but she took it. I was just trying to get away. I didn't see the cops." Ben's eyes went back to the floral purse, then to the knife, then to the heroic, dying woman on the ground who had tried to say she was a soldier. A cold dread, heavier than any gun, settled in his stomach. He moved over to Elena. He knelt beside her, careful, keeping his hands visible. He saw the dark pool growing beneath her. He saw the stark contrast of her pale palm, held up in surrender. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softening. "Can you hear me? Help is coming." Elena's eyes focused on his face for a second. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I need to see if you have an ID," Ben said. "I'm just going to check your pocket, okay? I'm not reaching for anything else." Elena's arm lowered, her strength failing. Ben, with trembling fingers, carefully patted the side pocket of her khaki pants. He felt a thin rectangle of leather. He pulled it out. It was a simple brown wallet. He flipped it open. The world stopped. Right behind a driver's license was a military ID card. Her photo. Her solemn, steady eyes stared back at him. And beside it, her rank, Captain, U.S. Army. The words swam in his vision. He read them once, twice, A sound escaped him, a low groan of pure, undiluted horror. He looked from the plastic card to the woman bleeding onto the dirty asphalt. A captain, a United States Army captain, who had stopped a crime, who had disarmed a suspect, who was shot while pinning down a criminal. Darrell, Ben said. The name came out as a broken whisper. He held up the ID, his hand shaking violently. Darrell, she's a captain. In the Army. Officer Jenkins finally looked away from Elena. He stared at the ID in his partner's hand. The color drained from his face completely, leaving a sickly gray mask. The gun in his hand, which had felt so solid a moment ago, now felt like a poisonous living thing. It grew heavy, impossibly heavy. His arm dropped to his side as if the muscle had been severed. He didn't holster it. He just let it hang there, dangling from his numb fingers. The distant sirens they had all heard were now right on top of them, screaming into the parking lot. Red and blue lights strobed against the brick walls, painting the scene in frantic, ugly colors. For Elena, the sounds were melting together, the sirens, the sobbing, the victim crying, the officer's ragged breaths. The black spots in her vision were growing, merging into a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel was that strip of normal, quiet, blue sky. She clung to the side of it. The last thing she felt, before the darkness finally pulled her under, was not the pain in her side. It was a deeper, more desolate ache. It was the feeling of having come home from war, only to find herself lying helpless in the middle of another one, a war she never signed up for, fought on a battlefield she never recognized, wounded by a threat she never saw coming. The sky went from blue to gray to nothing at all. The world returned to Elena in pieces. First came the smell-sharp, antiseptic, and clean, covering a fainter, metallic undertone she knew too well. Then came the sound, a steady, rhythmic beeping that matched the dull throb in her side. Finally, the light harsh and white against her eyelids. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids were heavy, sticky. A low moan escaped her lips before she could stop it. Elena? Sweetheart, can you hear me? Her mother's voice. It was cracked, raw with tears held back for too long. Elena forced her eyes open. The world was a blur of white and beige. She blinked slowly until her mother's face came into focus, hovering over her, lines of fear and exhaustion etched deep. Mom, Elena whispered. Her throat felt full of sand. A wave of relief broke over her mother's face, followed by a fresh sheen of tears. Thank God. Oh, thank God. Her cool hand brushed Elena's forehead. Don't try to talk. You're in the hospital. You're safe. Safe. The word echoed strangely in Elena's head. She took a slow inventory. She was lying flat. A thick pad of bandages was wrapped around her midsection. That was where the fire lived, now banked to a deep, aching burn. Tubes ran from her arm. The beeping was her own heart. And then, like a film reel snapping, the memories flooded back. The coffee shop. The chase. The knife. The shout. The searing, unbelievable impact. The young officer's pale, terrified face. Woman, Elena croaked, each word an effort. The purse. She's fine, honey. She's been outside the waiting room for hours. She's beside herself. You saved her. Her mother's voice tightened. They caught the man who did it. Elena closed her eyes. They hadn't caught the man with the knife. He was just a kid, a desperate, stupid kid. They had caught? Someone else got the door to the room open softly. A man in a suit, not a doctor, entered. He had a kind, tired face and carried a small folder. Behind him was a woman in an army combat uniform, a major, her posture ramrod straight, her face an unreadable mask of professional concern. Captain Vance, the major said, her voice crisp. "Good to see you awake. I'm Major Collins from JAG. This is Mr. Alvarez, a detective with the city's Force Investigation Division." Elena's mother stiffened, her protective grip on Elena's hand tightening. Mr. Alvarez offered a small, somber nod. "Captain, I'm deeply sorry for what happened to you. We need to get your account of the events when you feel up to it. It's the most important piece for our investigation." "An investigation?" Of course, there would be an investigation. She was a soldier. She understood protocols. She gave a weak nod, but over the next few hours, a different story began to take shape, seeping into her room not through the official channels, but through whispers and fragments. Her brother, red-eyed with anger, came in with a local news playing silently on his phone. The scroll at the bottom read, ***, police involved shooting downtown. Suspect and off-duty. Official reportedly wounded. ***, off-duty official. ***, not Army captain. Not heroic intervener. Suspect. Later, a young nurse, while checking her vitals, leaned in and murmured, "My cousin's a dispatcher." She said the first police report just called it an officer-involved shooting during a violent disturbance. Didn't say nothing about you being military, or about you being the good guy. The nurse looked furious and apologetic all at once. Major Collins returned, her lips a thin line. "Captain," she said, her voice lower now, "the department's initial report is sparse. It heavily emphasizes the 911 call describing a violent assault and the presence of the knife at the scene. It states the officers commanded the individual you to show hands and cease the assault, and that there was a sudden, threatening movement before the discharge of the weapon." Elena stared at the ceiling. A sudden, threatening movement. The thief had bucked. She'd shifted her weight to keep him down. From a certain angle, with a certain fear in your heart, maybe that could look like something else. They're building a wall, her brother spat out that evening, pacing the small room. They're gonna say it was a chaotic scene. You didn't identify yourself. You didn't comply fast enough. They're protecting their own. The deepest cut came 2 days later. Elena was more alert, the fog of painkillers less dense. A different detective, a woman with a softer demeanor, came to take her formal statement. Elena told it all, clearly, precisely, just as she would have debriefed the mission. The detective listened, nodded, took notes. At the end, the detective sighed, almost to herself. "It would have been helpful," she said gently, not meeting Elena's eyes, "if you had verbally identified yourself as law enforcement or military immediately upon seeing the officers." The room went very quiet. Elena felt her mother freeze beside her. "I am not law enforcement," Elena said, her voice flat and cold. "I was a civilian intervening in a crime. My first words were an attempt to identify myself. I was shot before I could finish the sentence." The detective nodded quickly. "Of course. I'm just illustrating the other perspective. In these high-stress situations, seconds matter. Clarity matters." After the detective left, Elena lay still. The wound in her side hurt, but this was a different kind of pain. It was a cold, heavy stone settling in her gut. She had spent her adult life in a world of rules, of chain of command, of clear identities, friend or foe, uniformed or civilian. Now she was in a gray zone. Her actions, which felt so clear and right in the moment, were being chopped up and examined under a microscope held by people who weren't there. Her identity, a black woman in tactical gear, strong, capable, had been read as a threat first, and everything else second. Major Collins came back, this time with a laptop. "The public affairs office is being flooded," she said bluntly. The victim gave an interview to the news. She told them everything: the robbery, your chase, how you saved her. It's starting to get traction online. People are asking questions. The off-duty official line isn't holding. She opened the laptop. There, on a local news site, was a picture of Elena. It was an official Army photo from her promotion to captain. She was in her dress uniform, her face serious, her eyes looking directly ahead with confidence. The headline now read, ***, decorated Army captain shot by police while apprehending robbery suspect. ***, Elena looked at her own face on the screen. That person in the photo knew who she was. The person in this hospital bed wasn't so sure. What happens now? Elena asked, her voice barely audible. Major Collins closed the laptop. Now, Captain, we fight on two fronts. The medical one and the truth one. The Army is behind you. But this is going to be a battle. The police union is getting involved. The narrative is contested. That night, as the hospital grew quiet, Alana finally let herself cry. Not loud sobs, just silent tears that tracked hot lines down her temples and into her hair. She cried from the pain. She cried from the frustration. She cried for the weird, sad irony of it all, surviving IEDs and sniper fire in a war zone, only to be gunned down in a back alley at home. Mostly. She cried because she felt a terrifying sense of erasure. The story of what happened, her story, was being rewritten in whispers and official reports. The brave thing she did was being turned into a tragic misunderstanding, a series of unfortunate mistakes where everyone shared a little blame. But she knew, in her bones, that the first and fatal mistake had been made in the few seconds. It took those officers to look at her and see an enemy. She touched the bandages on her side. The physical wound would heal with a scar. But the other wound, the one that came from realizing that her service, her strength, even her helpfulness, could be twisted into a reason to fear her, that wound felt like it might never close. She stared at the dark ceiling, the steady beep of the heart, monitor the only sound. For the first time since she'd put on the uniform, Captain Elena Vance felt utterly, completely, and dangerously alone. The hospital room became her new command post. The steady beep of the heart monitor was her new clock. Elena was used to long, difficult recoveries. She'd seen plenty of soldiers go through them, but this was different. This was a battle fought in whispers, in legal documents, and in the tight, controlled expressions of the people who came to see her. Her physical therapist was a cheerful, no-nonsense woman who had her sitting up, then standing, then taking agonizing shuffles around the room within a week. Every step was a fire in her side, a reminder of the bullet's path. "You're doing great, Captain," the therapist would say. But great felt like a tiny, fragile thing. The real war was happening outside her door. Major Collins became a daily presence, her uniform a stark contrast to the soft hospital gowns. She brought updates, her voice always low and careful. "The district attorney's office is reviewing the case," she said one morning, placing a tablet on Elena's bedside table. "But the police union lawyer is pushing hard. Their argument is split-second decision, tense and uncertain environment. They're saying the officer saw the knife, saw a violent struggle, and perceived a lethal threat." Alana looked out the window at the bland hospital parking lot. "I was the one who took the knife away," she said quietly. "I know," Major Collins replied. "But that detail gets lost in the split second. Their entire case rests on those 2 seconds. What the officer believed in those 2 seconds." Later that day, a visitor arrived who changed the temperature of the room. He was a civilian, an older man with sharp eyes and a calm, deliberate way of moving. He introduced himself as Mr. Vance's new attorney. Her family had hired him. His name was Arthur Lowe, and he had a reputation for taking on cases like hers. "Captain Vance," he said, shaking her hand gently, "your country owes you a debt. And now It seems your city does, too. We need to talk about how we collect on that." He didn't talk about split-second decisions. He talked about patterns. He talked about procedure. The 911 call from the coffee shop employee described a robbery and a chase. He explained, taking a seat. The call from the panicked driver, the one who saw a flash of the struggle, described an assault. Both calls went to the same dispatcher, but only the description of the assault was emphasized to the responding officers. Why? He let the question hang in the air. And the officers, he continued, they arrived with their guns drawn, based on that incomplete picture. Did they attempt to de-escalate? Did they give clear, manageable commands before one of them fired? Or did they see what they expected to see? He looked at Elena, his gaze steady. This isn't just about one bad day, Captain. This is about a system that failed you at every turn, from the dispatch to the response to the shooting. And now, in the aftermath, it is trying to protect itself. The narrative they want is tragic accident. Our job is to make sure the narrative is preventable injustice. He asked her permission to release her service record, her medals, her commendations, her clean history to the press. People need to see who you are, he said, not the blurry figure in a police report. The soldier, the person. Elena agreed. She felt a strange detachment, as if they were talking about someone else. But she not a dot the next morning. The story exploded. It was no longer just local news. A national website ran the story with the headline, **** combat decorated Army captain shot by police. While performing citizen's arrest, ****, they listed her awards. They quoted fellow soldiers who called her a leader, a patriot. They featured a tearful interview with the purse-snatching victim, who kept saying, "She was my angel." And they shot my angel. The public reaction was a tidal wave. Support poured in from veterans groups, from community leaders, from ordinary people who were horrified. Hashtags with her name trended. Candlelight vigils were held outside the police department, but so was the backlash. In the darker corners of the internet, other stories were planted. Commenters with anonymous profiles questioned why she was dressed like a soldier off-duty. They speculated wildly that she must have been aggressive, that she must have ignored commands. A few local talk radio hosts took the police union's line, talking somberly about the impossible burdens on officers and the chaos of the scene. Elena's brother tried to shield her from the worst of it, but she saw glimpses. Each negative comment, each doubting question, was like a small pinch on her heart. She had faced enemy propaganda before. This felt more personal, more vile. Then, Arthur Lowe delivered his first major blow. He called a press conference. He stood flanked by the Army major and Elena's family, her mother looking strong but frail. He didn't yell. He spoke in clear, cold facts. We have obtained and are releasing the full, unedited 911 audio calls, he announced. The room hushed. He played them. First, the clear, frantic voice of the coffee shop employee. A man just robbed a woman. A woman is chasing him. She's trying to help. Then, the second panicked voice. There's a big woman beating up a guy in the alley. It's violent. Send help. The contrast was chilling. The dispatcher had relayed the second, more inflammatory description as the primary scene. The officers, Lowe continued, were sent into an ambush of misinformation. They were not told they were responding to a robbery with a heroic intervener. They were told they were rushing into a violent assault. This failure set the stage for tragedy. He then held up a single piece of paper. This is the initial police report filed by Officer Darrell Jenkins. It states Captain Vance failed to comply with numerous orders and made a threatening move. Yet, we have 5 eyewitnesses from the street who have given sworn statements that they heard. Only one shout from police before the gunshot. One, we have the victim, who states Captain Vance was in complete control of the suspect and was not making any aggressive moves. This report is not just inaccurate. It appears to be a fabrication designed to justify the unjustifiable. The room erupted in shouted questions. On screen, Lowe's face was stern. We are calling for a full, independent federal investigation, and we are calling for the immediate suspension of Officer Jenkins without pay, and for the resignation of the police chief who is presiding over this cover-up. Back in the hospital, watching the news clip on her tablet, Elena felt a grim sense of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. Now she was a symbol, a pawn in a huge public fight. She was no longer just a woman healing from a wound. She was a rallying cry, a scandal, a political problem. That evening, Major Collins returned. Her expression was graver than usual. "The Department of Justice is opening an investigation," she said. "That's good. It's what we wanted." She paused. "The officer who shot you, Jenkins. He's been placed on paid administrative leave. Not fired. Not suspended without pay. Just on leave." Elena absorbed this. Paid leave. A vacation for shooting her. "There's something else," Major Collins said slowly. "My contacts tell me Jenkins is not doing well. He's isolated himself. The pressure, the media. He knows what he did. That doesn't excuse it. But he's not some monster hiding behind a badge. He's a man who made a catastrophic mistake in a system that primed him to make it." Elena turned away. She didn't want to hear about his pain. His pain wasn't a bullet in her side. His pain wasn't the nightmares that now woke her, drenched in sweat, back in that alley. His pain wasn't the fear she saw in her mother's eyes every time a police car drove by, but his lawyer's words echoed in her head, split-second decision. She looked down at her hands. They were strong hands. They had fired weapons, treated wounds, lifted comrades. Now they trembled slightly from the pain medication. In that split second, those hands, the hands of a person trying to help, had been seen as weapons themselves. The fight was bigger than her now. It was about 911 protocols. It was about police training. It was about bias and fear. She was the catalyst. But she was lying in a hospital bed, powerless, while lawyers and politicians and pundits fought over what her story meant. A deep fatigue settled over her, heavier than any physical pain. She was a soldier without a unit, in a battle where the front lines were everywhere and nowhere at all. All she could do was heal and wait and wonder if the truth, even if it finally won, would ever be enough to stitch her back together. The scar on Elena's side was a tight, raised ridge of flesh, a permanent map of a single terrible moment. The doctors called it healed. They signed the papers. The Army, after long reviews and quiet deliberations, granted her a medical discharge. The career she had built, the identity she wore as proudly as her uniform, was over. The finality of it sat in a small cardboard box on her kitchen table. A folded flag, her medals, her insignia. The legal battle, however, reached its own end. The federal investigation, a slow and grinding machine, concluded. The evidence was too stark, the public pressure too great. The 911 tape, the witness accounts, the stark contrast between the police report and reality. It painted a picture of reckless negligence and implicit bias. Officer Darrell Jenkins was charged with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. He resigned from the force the same day. The city, wanting to avoid a long, ugly trial, settled a civil lawsuit with Elena for a significant sum. The news called it justice. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like an ending, but a hollow one. The money was a number in a bank account, blood money that felt cold to the touch. Jenkins' conviction would mean prison time, But watching him led away in handcuffs wouldn't give her back her body, her career, or her sense of safety in her own hometown. The system had coughed up a scapegoat and a check, but the machine itself remained unchanged. For months, Elena drifted. The structure of the army was gone. The purpose was gone. She took long, aimless walks, her hand instinctively going to her side when a car backfired or a door slammed too hard. The world was full of sudden noises that made her flinch. She saw police officers on patrol and felt a cold knot in her stomach, a visceral reaction she hated but couldn't control. She was a ghost in her own life. Her lawyer, Arthur Lowe, was the one who broke her out of the fog. He came to her small apartment, not with legal papers, but with a question. "The money," he said, stirring a cup of tea she'd made. "It's just sitting there. It's a resource. What are you going to do with it?" Elena stared out the window. "I don't know. Live, I guess." "You're not just a survivor, Captain," he said, using her old title deliberately. "You're a strategist. You saw a problem in that alley, a criminal, a victim, and you acted. The bigger problem, the one that put you on the ground, is still out there. What's the mission now?" His words stuck with her. The bigger problem. It wasn't just one nervous officer. It was the call that primed him. It was the training that failed him. It was the bias he never had to confront until it was too late. It was the fact that someone like her, competent, authoritative, helpful, could be seen as a threat because of the color of her skin and the clothes on her back. She started reading. She devoured studies on police training, on implicit bias, on use of force policies. She reached out, tentatively at first, to retired police trainers, to community activists, to psychologists specializing in trauma, in conflict. She used her military network to find people who designed simulation training for soldiers. She learned about scenarios, about stress inoculation, about decision-making under pressure. A year after the shooting, the Vance Initiative was born. She used the settlement money to fund it. It wasn't a protest group. It was a training organization. Her first project was to create a hyper-realistic simulation module for police, academies, and in-service training. She didn't build scenarios about bank robbers with assault rifles. She built scenarios that were murky, like her own. A shoplifting call where the suspect is a confused elderly veteran. A domestic dispute where the loudest person isn't the most dangerous one. And yes, a street crime where a bystander, maybe a person of color, maybe a veteran in tactical gear, is the one trying to help. She hired actors. She built sets. She used virtual reality. The core of the training wasn't about shooting. It was about slowing down the split second. It was about teaching officers to scan for more information. Is there a victim crying? Is there a discarded purse? Is the person shouting words or just screams? It was about challenging the first, fastest story their brain told them not. It was hard, uphill work. Some departments wanted nothing to do with her. They saw her as a troublemaker with an axe to grind. But others, often led by younger, reform-minded chiefs, were willing to listen. The first contract was small, with a suburban department. Elena stood in the observation room, her heart pounding as she watched officers go through her alley scenario. When the first officer, playing the responding cop, recognized the helpful bystander actor and de-escalated, shouting, "Mom, we'll take it from here, thank you." Instead of drawing his weapon, Elena had to leave the room. She leaned against the cool wall in the hallway and cried for the first time in months. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of a desperate, fragile hope. The day of Officer Jenkins' sentencing arrived. Elena's family and lawyer urged her not to go. "It will only hurt you," her mother said. But she had to. She needed to see it through. The courtroom was tense and quiet. Jenkins looked smaller in a cheap suit than he had in his uniform. He looked broken, hollowed out. When the judge gave Elena the chance to make a victim impact statement, she stood slowly. The scar pulled. She walked to the podium, but she didn't look at Jenkins. She looked at the judge, and then at the room. "I'm not here to ask for more punishment," she began, her voice clear but quiet. "The court will decide that. I'm here to describe a cost. The cost is a life of service ended. The cost is waking up every morning and touching a reminder of a day you tried to do a good thing. The cost is looking at the country you swore to defend and feeling like a stranger in it." She paused, gathering herself. Officer Jenkins made a decision, but he did not make it in a vacuum. He was sent into a situation with bad information. He was trained to see threats in certain ways. He was, I believe, a man who likely never once considered that a woman who looks like me, acting as I was, could be anything other than a danger. That is a failure far bigger than one man. Now, she turned and met Jenkins' eyes for the first time since the alley. He flinched. "My life was changed forever by your action," she said directly to him. "But your life is also changed. You have to live with what you did. And I have chosen to live with it by trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to someone else's daughter, not to another soldier coming home, and not to another officer who has to carry that weight. The enemy that day wasn't you. It was the confusion, the fear, and the failure to see a human being clearly for what she was." She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Jenkins put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. She ignored their shouted questions until one yelled, "Captain Vance, do you forgive him?" Elena stopped. She turned toward the cameras, her face calm but weary. "Forgiveness is a private thing," she said. "My work is public. It's not about forgiveness. It's about fixing what's broken, so less forgiveness is needed." She walked away, toward where her mother and Lawyer waited. The sun was bright. The scar on her side ached, a familiar, persistent companion. The war was not won. It might never be. But for the first time since she'd woken up in that hospital bed, Captain Elena Vance had a mission again. She was no longer on the front line holding a rifle. She was in training rooms and policy meetings, holding a mirror to a system and asking it, calmly and with relentless precision, to see what it had missed. It was a quieter fight, a longer one, but it was hers, and she was back in it.